So we're at 102. So let's go ahead and get started. I think we'll have a few more people trickle in here over the next couple minutes, but I want to go ahead and begin things. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mitch Weiss. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at Caveo Learning. Thanks for joining us today. We all know how busy you are and your schedules, and we're glad you could join us for the next hour or so to talk about something that we find really important and something that you obviously found important. Caveo Learning, we've been around for 14 years and we do a lot of custom content creation and learning consulting. We do it for hundreds of companies every year, which in a way that gives us kind of exposure to a lot of different requests and so many different types of training. And one of the most common ones that we see on a project-to-project basis is IT training. For example, system training for staff around new IT products, bugs, fixes, enhancements, basically how to use the software and all of the training that entails. That being said, we also encounter, a lot of the same issues that you guys are probably seeing, the struggles that most of you can probably really relate to. Timelines, lack of documentations, usage of finalized systems, SME issues, the list is probably a mile long. Like I said before, we do this hundreds of times a year. So we got a really good feeling, a really good experience for how to resolve some of those issues. And, today we wanted to really have a frank and open and honest panel discussion, about the experience our teams has faced and how we've overcome some of those issues. Then we wanted to hear from you guys so that we can share together as a learning community on best practices and kind of experiences that we've all been through so that we can learn from one another. Feel free to participate in the conversation using the chat window at the bottom of your screen. You can always open that up and chat any questions or comments, and we really do encourage that. Our moderator, Jess Hudak, is going to be active in the chat window. She just popped up. Hi, Jess. She's going to bring up any questions you guys might have or any interesting topics she's monitoring. So feel free to use that. We're also going to leave a few minutes at the end of the webinar for a more open table discussion for an Ask Anything type Q&A session. So feel free to line up those questions at the end and feel free to ask. We'll try to save about 5 or 10 minutes for that. So we have assembled an expert team of Caveo staff that they bring a lot of perspectives to the table. Again, I'm Mitch Weiss, CLO of Caveo. I have over about 25 years experience in L&D, and a large chunk of my experience was actually leading a IT learning and development team, one of the nation's largest healthcare providers. So I can honestly say I've been through a lot of the same thing you guys have been going through with that IT training. Have a lot of insight, led a team of designers and trainers for about 5 or 6 years through that. Let's meet the rest of the team. Barb Opit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Barb Opit. I'm Learning Solution Architect here at Caveo. And I'm an IT nerd from way back. I always say that, I cut my teeth on technology, but then I decided that I'm really a people person. So I think for me, training people about computer systems is a lot more fun than developing them. And that's how I got into where I am today. I love to work with organizations they're making the change happen.
Thanks, Barb. Christine, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Christine Jastro, New Business Development Director here at Caveo. I'm very excited to speak with you all today. I bring about 10 years of experience in learning and training to the table, but one of my roles here at Caveo is speaking with L&D leaders about supporting their L&D initiatives. And most recently, many of those initiatives center around IT training. So very excited to dig into this topic with you today.
Thanks, Christine. How about Paul? You go next.
Hi, everyone. I am Paul Powell, PMO Director at Caveo Learning, and I am a longtime L&D and project management guy. I have worked across knowledge management. I've held roles in systems implementation, a lot of projects in the L&D space, and I am currently responsible for Caveo's project management practice on L&D projects, and happy to be here.
Thanks, Paul. And last but definitely not least, Eric Quarrell.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Quarrell. I am the development manager here at Caveo. I've been in e-learning and adult learning development in some way, shape, or form for a little over 16 years. And that includes systems training, IT training, software training, and everything in that regard. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to try to keep this as interactive as possible because none of us like those webinars where we preach at you. So we're going to start with a poll. We kind of want to hear back from you guys. So Jess, if you want to bring that up, we're going to talk, first and foremost is how do you deliver most of your IT training today? There's multiple ways to deliver, and we're kind of interested in hearing from you about exactly how you deliver most of your training. So why don't you go ahead and vote? We'll give that about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll take a look at the quick results, and then we'll start talking about them. Wow, yeah, definitely. That's pretty common. Looks like we've got about 50%. Majority of the deliver via job aids and quick reference guides, some type of documentation. So that's pretty common. You guys are creating print documents or PDFs that you kind of distribute to most folks, and that seems to be a majority of what we see out in the field. I think that kind of folds into some other discussions that we've had with clients, and like I said, we do talk with a lot of clients. I think, Christine, you're usually at the front end of these conversations where you'll be talking to a client right away. What kind of challenges do L&D leaders come to us when they're trying to train in IT topics?
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I would say there are really 3 challenges that we've probably identified as, I would say, the most pressing for when an L&D leader reaches out for a conversation. So the first being around large system implementations, right? So implementation is usually what's catalyst for training or change management. So really it's crucial that it's done correctly, really just to drive any training initiative forward, right? And then another challenge I would say that I want to identify is working with ever-changing content. So it's not as simple as developing training that is evergreen and not needing to be updated on a continual basis. So teams really have to have both the capability to make these updates to ensure their content stays relevant, but they also need the capacity to take on these updates while managing all these new projects coming down the pipeline. And then this third challenge that I'll highlight is really this realization that IT teams are evolving in so many ways. So quite simply, if you think about it, roles and responsibilities of what IT teams do now is so different and more complex than what they did 10 years ago. And that's causing some skill gaps. So a lot of L&D teams are needing to just develop training around, addressing those skill gaps. What do they have to develop to make it, catch those people up to speed? And I would say those are the primary reasons that we're seeing people reach out to Caveo for support.
Yeah, definitely. Things have changed, and you talk a lot about skill gaps. And I think one of the things we've noticed here at Caveo is these teams going remote, right? That there's been some major skill gaps because people are now, not in the office and they're working in a remote environment. How do you think L&D teams have pivoted to training on IT skills in a remote environment?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that because, there's much more reliance on creating these group coaching opportunities, right? So instead of, in the I'll say old days of coaches walking up to a desk and saying, how can I support this new implementation that we're doing? How can I help you? The desk is now your laptop and normally wherever you happen to work in your home. So these coaching opportunities need to be more scheduled, and not only scheduled, but the interactions need to be more intentional and well organized in order to make an impact. And then, as I'm sure everyone on the call is very familiar, there's also that huge shift from what we used to do in person learning to e-learning and virtual instructor-led training, right? So while this has been a challenge for a lot of L&D teams to work through and to adjust quickly, it really is also a struggle for learners as well. So for this reason, teams need to, and still are, considering things like self-paced learning, micro-learning, just to accommodate those individual working environments and the change that they're going through, and build in those virtual coaching opportunities to offer more support, since you can't have those virtual coaching opportunities, those coaching opportunities in person anymore. So I would say those are some of the biggest things that we've seen with this virtual environment.
Yeah, those are all really important things. I think we've seen less of this in the past. One more thought that came to mind, Christine, when you were talking is, a lot of the training that has happened over the past 2 years of the pandemic has been that coaching, right? That one-on-one, kind of things. And we saw in there that a lot of it is documentation and short materials. But during that time period, there's also been huge system implementations. Business still has to go on, right?
Mhm.
So, there's things like, Workday, SAP, large system implementations that happen. What advice, when you're talking to L&D leaders, do you typically give them about going through those huge implementations?
Yeah. I mean, to start with the basics, set realistic expectations and accept that you will face some resistance to change, even for what appears to be a simple system upgrade. Next, just know the roles that people are owning now and what they will need to own after the implementation. Understanding just really helps with a perspective of learning and change management. And you can think of it as, what did you used to do? What will you be doing differently? And this is why it's going to be done differently. The why is very important. And then more specifically around the change management aspect, select change champions to represent all areas of the business and engage them in development, preview the technology with them, get their input on the technology, and then also select a technical team to align with those change champions, right? For maybe sneak peeks or just to get ahead of the change curve. And these individuals just collectively will help to just ensure whatever the adjustment that is, being presented to these end users, that it goes smoothly, forgive me. And then lastly, just thinking about, managing sponsor relationships and expectations. You'll likely have an IT sponsor, but also find the individual or the team most impacted by the change within the organization. And that individual or team will have a sponsor. Align that sponsor with your IT sponsor and have those individuals present everything on a consistent basis and make their message consistent, have them be unified. That kind of, approach is going to be seen throughout the organization and is very crucial. And then really just get your sponsors engaged a little bit more just by delivering a message to them, reiterating that the change is going to help the broader business. So really drive that message home.
Yeah, those are all great points you made, especially around the change management. I think you can have the world's best training as far as it comes to IT and a new system that you're implementing. But if people don't want to use that system, they're not going to want to take the training. So there's a whole, ecosphere of just change management that's a critical piece. And I think, we'll definitely have a lot to say about that later on once we get in to some further questions. But let's pop up another poll. Thanks, Christine, by the way. We really appreciate your input there. It's really insightful. Let's pop up another poll. We'll talk really quick. I ran an IT training group, so I can say 100% of the training was IT, but I'm interested in your day-to-day, month to month, how much of your training is actually IT? We usually encounter, groups that train just for IT, but general L&D groups that have some IT. So we're interested in hearing how much of your time is dedicated to that. So if you can fill out the poll and answer, what percentage of all your training is IT training, I'd be interested to see that. Yeah, it's a huge chunk, right? We're between 25 and 50%. You consider that's 44% of you kind of said that's a large amount of IT training. That's kind of what we expect and we see, right? Systems are one of the harder things to train, we find, so you got to dedicate a lot of resources to do that. So thanks for answering that. Now, from an instructional design perspective, I'm interested in hearing from the team a little bit. A lot of people veer towards e-learning, right? Just because you can do certain things in e-learning that you can't do in IoT, and some say you can do things in IoT that you can't do in e-learning, and documentation is different. But we're finding a lot of our clients are asking for e-learning when it comes to that type of training. So Eric, I'm interested in hearing why you think that is. Why do people kind of ask for e-learning first when it comes to IT type training?
Sure. I think a lot of people gravitate towards e-learning. First of all, like you mentioned before, a lot of people are remote now. right? So
Yeah.
it's the easiest way to kind of reach your remote audience without having to schedule actual time with somebody on a Zoom call or something like that. And then the other reasons I think it's a really big ask is because you can kind of you can approach training in a lot of different ways through e-learning. Especially when it's IT or systems training or software training, you could recreate the entire system within an e-learning and actually have, you know, a real functional or at least semi-functional recreation of a IT tool within an e-learning course. So you can create real world scenarios and have them practice on a mock system of some kind. It might not have full functionality, but in some way it'll at least represent, you know, the final product. Or you can include different aspects of videos and watch and learn type scenarios. So there's a lot of different ways that e-learning allows you to approach IT and systems training, and still give you that remote aspect as well. So it's very versatile when it comes to a training solution.
Mhm. If I can add to that, I agree that there's benefit to having that asynchronous delivery in e-learning, which is efficient and great for remote workers, of course. But I would challenge you to consider other ways to make it more human. You know, could you also add in a Zoom call? Sure, you could. Could you also add in a video that is emailed to the users, reinforcing the why that this change is happening and so forth? You know, that multi-channel approach is great for communication. It's also great for training.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, Barb, kind of mixing it up, right? Using different modalities to kind of engage people in different ways. And Eric, you brought up a good point, you know, replicating a system, right? You know, using simulations. That's one of the things that I think has always been a struggle, right? IT training is inherently boring, right? You type information into a system, you click a button, you type some more information in their system and you click a button. You know, it's easy to put learners to sleep when you create training, whether it's, you know, whatever modality you're using. How do you go about creating kind of fun and engaging training on something that's usually extremely boring?
Yeah, it can definitely be a challenge depending on the topic at hand. I mean, if you're doing a system step-by-step process where it's, you know, enter this data in this field, click this button, and it's kind of just a repetitive process, it's definitely a challenge. I think using real world scenarios or even fictional scenarios around those types of things where, especially in an e-learning where you can do branching, and even add some gaming elements to it. For example, one scenario that it comes to mind that we did personally is we had somebody that was doing a sales system scenario, right? And we just put scoring around it. So you just have these different scenarios that come up where you want the user to go through their process, and as they're helping this customer with this system, you know, they're getting positive or negative points based on their choices, and it's just tracking that through. And it's a minor thing, it's very easy to implement, but it just adds some more engagement to the regular click, fill this out, click this button, hit enter kind of process. And it doesn't have to be even real world. Again, you could do a fictional scenario where you're not trying to save the planet and you have to fill out the form in the right way. And, you know, you just try to think outside the box and not just go step by step by step. You're still teaching those step-by-step processes, but you're just adding a little bit more engagement to the whole scenario of why you're learning and why it's important. Another thing is, I think, try to keep it small if you can. Give them the information in bite-sized chunks. You don't want to try to cram, you know, 3 days of systems learning into, you know, a 2-hour e-learning. It's just not going to work. And especially nowadays, people learn better in bite-sized chunks, right? You look at how people learn when they want to learn how to cook something, how to fix something, how to make something. What do? They jump on YouTube and look at a 10-minute tutorial, right? So if we can build our trainings in that same way and break them up into bite-sized pieces, this is how you log into your system. This is how you place an order in your system. This is how you add a customer in your system. And you do those all as separate little individual bite-sized chunks. It makes it more manageable for the end user to retain that information. And they're just not inundated with tons of information all at once. And then, like a lot of people added to That first panel question, a lot of people do documents, job aids, quick reference guides. If you can supplement your e-learning with information like that, so it doesn't all have to be within the e-learning itself, then you can say, check this document for more information. You put the critical information in your e-learn, but then you put that supplemental information that doesn't necessarily, it's good to know, or that's a good, hey, put this on the wall of your kiosk or your cubicle, and take this with you. Again, you don't inundate them with a ton of information all at once, and you keep the critical information important, and you can help it engage more that way.
Yeah. That's actually a great segue to say that this is another trick for helping you with those subject matter experts that think you need to know everything. If you can tell them, okay, yes, we need to know everything, but we'll put this part in the job aid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely kind of slide some of the nice to knows into that job aid, like you guys are saying. So I'm interested, for those of you on the webinar, what are some of the best experiences you've either had or created when you were doing some IT training, some fun and kind of engaging ways? If you want to use the chat box to kind of share, a brief description of what you did or what you actually took as far as the training goes. Eric, when you were talking, I actually was thinking of something. You were talking about creating an environment within the system and doing simulations with that, and kind of everything, comes from that, genesis of the system. Well, I think that most people on this call can relate to this. What do you do when the system's not ready, right? Because typically we're asked to create training, right? Before it's even developed. So what do we do?
Sure. And that happens a lot. And it's not even necessarily the system's being developed. It could be your system's getting updated, but you don't know what those updates are going to look like. You just know they're coming, those types of things. So, working closely with your SME, utilizing placeholder content when necessary. So you might have the overall changes to the system that are coming. You can still build out those elements that we know are in place, and put placeholders for those things that are still questionable, or development notes letting your SME and your stakeholders know this information is forthcoming, and this is what we kind of have an idea what it's going to be and what we're planning for. I think when at all possible, and it's not always possible in everybody's situation, but working sessions with your content providers and your stakeholders and your SMEs are great for systems training, because if not, you might be getting just a dump of information, process documents, screenshots, and they're saying, okay, here, put our training together with this. But if you can have a working session and say, okay, this is what you gave me, I'm going to start putting it together, let me know if I'm doing it right, and you just sit there on a 1, 2, 3 hour call and just knock it out and make those changes, that's great. One of the things here at Caveo that we do with our A2 process is we work in sprints similar to IT development. So our development process is very in line with IT development, because we kind of build the house from the ground up, right? We build first the foundation. We just look at content and flow, and then once we have that in line, we move on to media integration and audios and interaction and those types of things, and then we put it all together. And so we eliminate a lot of the going back and having to rework stuff with the process that we have involved, because we've aligned our A2 process with how IT develops their process as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point you make there, Eric. And I've found that, to your point, when you mirror what IT does, a lot of times, an L&D department has to kind of follow along with the way the IT development teams are creating, and you're dependent a lot upon on their processes. But the A square process we hear as Caveo is kind of structured for that, for agile methodology, and most companies do that. So when you can kind of mirror what they're doing in your development process, I think it kind of matches up, right?
Yes.
It kind of plug and play type process for L&D that kind of fits into what the IT development team's doing. It makes for an easier process. So
yep.
Thanks, Eric. I think we should probably do another poll really quick. Do we have one lined up, Jess? There we go. I love this was brought up earlier by Christine, and change management is really big to me personally. So I'm interested from a larger group perspective, what kind of change management adoption techniques do you guys use? I know that some places it's big, some places it's, non-existent, and other places kind of, do some minor. So I'm interested in hearing what you guys typically do on your IT training, whether it's a large scale project or just something small. So why don't you go ahead and check any or all those that kind of fit. Yeah, definitely. That seems to be the popular. About 79% of you are saying that typically, some type of email goes out, and then maybe an email from the boss or CEO or CIO that kind of goes out there. So thanks for that. So I have a question for the team, particularly, I think, Barb, this might be up your alley. We talked previously with Christine about large system upgrades. I'm interested in the hearing, since you do a lot of the planning around training. What are some of the keys to training for a huge system upgrade or implementation?
Couple of things. Number one, plan for it, because you know it's going to happen and they're going to pull the trigger on it and you're going to have to respond quickly. So plan for it. The other thing is, we were just talking about change management. I think that thinking about your training in terms of a change management project is great. And I like, the ADKAR model, thinking about the sequencing of the training. And the first thing that people need to know is just an awareness of the need for that change. And that might be part of that executive messaging that you're talking about, that you said, a lot of people said that they were sending out, why we have to do this change. And then help build some desire to support that change by really honing in on what's in it for the learner, for the user of the system. What's going to be easier, better, is it better for the business? Is it better for the individual, and so forth? And then, give them the opportunities to get the knowledge of the specifics that they need. Be upfront about all the major differences. Let them know that there will be a pain point, if there is going to be one, in that conversion process, and so forth. Work on through that knowledge. Give them a chance to practice using the ability to demonstrate those skills and behaviors with practical examples. Very key to see how it's going to be in action. And then think about, after it's all said and done, how are you going to reinforce the change? It's the worst thing in the world when an upgrade happens and then everybody wants to revert back to the old way of doing things. So plan some sort of follow-up, a week, 2 weeks, a month later, after your upgrades, just to make sure that things are going well. Keep them engaged.
Oh, great tips. Thanks, Barb. On that note, that type of training, particularly the upgrades and then the new implementations,
Yeah.
they require a lot of hands-on, right? In order to learn a new system, you got to get in there. You got to actually do it, right? Most of us learn, and I always use this analogy: how did you learn Word? You probably went in the Word and you tried it on, you tested. A lot of hands-on activities. How do you handle that when time's really short, resources are strained? How do you get that hands-on activity to the learner in a way that's really going to get them to learn it fast?
Right. That's a really good question. And, a few strategies for that would be to, think of those practical examples, give them a challenge exercise that they can do on their own. And of course, be there to support them when they do have challenges in that practical exercise. I always like that as well. And kind of goes back to one of the things that Eric was talking about earlier about that nice to know and need to know. Make sure that they have an opportunity to practice what they absolutely have to practice, and maybe throw in a few nice to knows along with that. Give them some fun challenges. Scavenger hunt.
Definitely make it fun.
Yeah.
So you touched on this really when Eric was talking, Barb, but I kind of want to revisit it. I wrote down a note here. And gosh knows this never happens. But how do you typically manage when IT subject matter experts want to include everything, and the user has to suddenly be a SME after 30 minutes of training?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, it honestly, as learning and development professionals, you know, we have to respect our subject matter experts because clearly, you know, we're not the technologists, they're the technologists, we're the learning people. So we need to help guide them to what they need to know. You know, a lot of it is that nice to know and have to know and nice to know. And maybe you can think about talking to them in their own terms, especially if they are agile development houses. Talk with them about user stories and learner personas. Help them develop that empathy for the end user and the, you know, how overwhelmed the end user is going to feel if you pile all of this on them right away. And that'll help them think about how to parse it out to, you know, what do we absolutely need to know first, and layering on, and then, you know, be sure to assure them that all of their knowledge is going to be able to be available at some level in some way, like we were talking about the job aids or the documentation set. Partnering with your technical writers is key for sure in that aspect too.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I love, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say if I can add a little to that.
Yeah.
I mean, Barb's right on. And then like when I look at it from a development standpoint, and I'm working with a SME and they're saying kind of the same thing, and they're like, you know, I need all of this included because they need to know it. Talking it through and just helping them understand from the end user perspective, because lots of times that's kind of where the SME loses the disconnect, is they're looking at it from their perspective of, I'm a SME, I need to know it, all of this stuff is important to me, right? And so we need to turn that around and say, okay, well, let's see what's important to your end user. What are you trying to have them accomplish at the end of this training, right? That's the key thing. What is the goal of this training for the end user? What do they need to know to do their job by the end of this training? And then talking it through to them and saying, okay, well, we have 30 minutes to accomplish that. They're probably going to remember 1 to 2 things after this 30 minutes. What's the most important, right? And you just kind of walk it back that way of, okay, what's your number 1? What's your number 2? All the rest of this is nice to have. Let's see what we can do and how we can get that information to them without getting in the way of 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's always my favorite question that you ask during the design workshops, Eric, is if you could only have them know 3 things, what will they be? Yeah.
And I love that too from a PM standpoint, because sometimes what I observe is that the SMEs need to be guided back to, right, kind of what are the key objectives, what really are the must-haves versus the nice-haves. So I think sometimes there's an awareness that we have, right, from our seat that they don't, and they just need to be guided back to, right, how to think about it.
Oh, great. And I love that. I love, Barb, that you touch on empathy. I once was working on an IT project, a new system implementation, and I had a subject matter expert in the room as well as a new learner, right? We were getting perspectives from everyone. And the SME started to come up with a list of everything that you need to know for the system. And literally it was everything you need to know for the system. And the new user kind of turned to the SME and said, how long did it take you to learn this? And, you know, the SME said 17 years. And then the new learner said, I have 30 minutes. So, you know, what can we do to kind of streamline this? And what's the most important pieces? Maybe in, 17 years, I can be just as much of an expert at you, but for now I need to know 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it was really organic in the meeting because it came from a learner and it really made for a great example. So that's something I like to ask, as me, how long did it take you? And well, we don't have that time. What are the key pieces? And I think kind of whittling it down is a good idea. So since we're on SMEs, I don't want to move away from this, Barb. This is a really good topic. Subject matter experts are typically the busiest people when it comes to an IT development team. They're the ones that are doing the development, leading the development teams. During a new system enhancement, during a bug fix, they're working super hard. They don't have a ton of time to dedicate to you to kind of sit down for an hour every day or 2 hours every day. How do you kind of manage that?
That's a really good question. Right, it can be a challenge. And actually, Eric touched on this earlier, talking about doing working sessions with SMEs rather than trying to do it with a back and forth, give me your documentation, then I'll come back with 25 questions in an email, then you have to respond to the email. Then I have 25 questions about the answers that you gave me in that email. Yeah, that's definitely not an efficient way, use of anyone's time. Absolutely plan on some working sessions with the SMEs. If you can grab them for 30 minutes or an hour once or twice a week. That's easier for them to fit into their schedule than this back and forth. I also, if at all possible, attend the stand-ups occasionally or during critical points of the development process, so that you can hear what is going on with the development process itself. That'll give you give you some insight into what's going on. It'll also provide you with some credibility with the development team, that you're a part of that team and not just, some outside entity that's bugging them all the time.
All right, you get a seat at the table. That's excellent.
Yeah, right.
Cool. I think we're due for another poll. So why don't we, I think we have one more there. So these are the hit list of items that we've encountered with IT training that we typically run into. I'm interested in seeing which of these kind of impacts you guys the most. So why don't you go ahead and vote, and we'll wait a few seconds and then we'll see where we're at on this one. Speaking of SMEs.
Yeah.
And the results.
Oh,
All of the above. Somehow I knew that would be the #1 response. It sounds like we've all been through some IT training development. Paul, I'm going to bring up probably a word that's going to make you cringe. And get ready, Paul. Everyone, Paul's face will probably cringe. Make a weird face when I say this. How do you handle scope creep on IT projects? Because we all know that happens. So
that's a great question. And actually, I am not going to cringe. I'm going to give the surprising answer. So I don't think you avoid scope creep. I think you manage it. But I do think that on IT system training projects, that change can actually be a good thing. And I think that as you move down the line and progress in the project, it's often the case that you have better information, right, kind of midstream than you had at the start. So I think it's a matter of really making sure, one, at the outset, that there really is an appropriate budget for the training. A lot of times, right, because for various reasons, training can, right, feel like, I'm not saying, we all know that it's not, but it can feel like it's an afterthought. The right budget doesn't get assigned to it. And I think creating that space at the beginning is super important. Right, from the project manager's seat, you may or may not have opportunity to impact that from the outset, but it's important. After that, I think having a strong relationship with the sponsor, right? So that if anything expands, again, we're talking about managing the scope creep, not avoiding it, so that you can address that and make space for it. I think looking for efficiencies throughout your process. I know that at Caveo is a part of A². On almost every project that we go into, in the first phase, we're working together with the project team to identify where there might be possible efficiencies. And the goal of that is that, right, we may open up rooms somewhere else to be accommodating to change. And that's really what I'm saying overall, is that we want to manage the scope and use all the usual scope management, right, PM tools to do that. But we want to be as accommodating to change as possible with the goal of creating the best product as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I think part of the creation of scope is a result of an IT project. Sometimes timelines, timeframes, they're kind of compressed and kind of squeezed down, especially when you're working in an agile environment. I'm also interested in the chat. I'm interested to hear what people are doing on this. How do you handle when an IT development team comes by and they say, we need some training and we need it in a week or 2 weeks. And that timeline is just unreasonable with your normal development cycles. How do you deal with that? Paul, I'd be interested to hear what you had to say on that too.
Yeah, I think that selecting the right approach at the outset is important when you're thinking about schedule, because we're constantly, it seems to me that, right, every engagement we go into, there's a hard line date at the end of it. And we really have to think about how to do this, how to produce the best training in the most, right, kind of efficient time frame, and really bringing the project management team together at the beginning. And when I say project management team, I don't mean just the instructional designers and learning solution architects, instructional developers, but also folks from the tech team to sit down and really try to identify opportunities. Again, looking across the schedule, asking key questions about what are nice haves, what are must haves, what are the business drivers, those sorts of questions to understand what should be priority, and then, right, really trying to step into the right approach. For us, sometimes we'll have a project and there's a lot of requirements at the beginning, and we have to make decisions about, will we use a waterfall approach? Will we do sprints? Will we try to do, as has been mentioned in some of the earlier responses, a lot of live working sessions where we can move through things quickly? We've really got a toolbox that helps us move along faster sometimes. And it's really about bringing the project management team together at the beginning, I think, to try to identify as much efficiency as possible and fit those priority items into the schedule.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we definitely have some interesting responses in the chat. Joe kind of mentioned, pushing back on realistic timelines, right? That's always
Absolutely.
an option, right?
Absolutely.
An IT learning team needs to realize that you only have so much capacity, you only have so much capability, and you can only spend so much on training. So, try to find off-the-shelf options or content providers that can kind of backfill for you or provide those, that support that you might need. Also, Renisha was saying that, you give them the option to support with a knowledge hour. I love that idea. It's thinking outside the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get so stuck in mind frames that we need to make a job aid or an e-learn or an ILT or something. Get creative in the way we design. Come up with some new ideas. That's awesome. I love to hear that. Paul, I have one more question for you, and this is kind of the ultimate question, and I think it's something everybody is really wanting to do. I think a lot of times when it comes to IT training, the learning team is the forgotten team, right? We're last to know about things. We're kind of left off important discussions. How do we make sure that learning and development has a seat at the table for all IT projects?
I think we have to kick the door open, push somebody else out of their seat, and sit down at the table.
Force yourself in.
I think to me, it really comes back to having strong relationships. I think particularly the L&D project manager has to have a strong relationship with the sponsor and whoever the business partner is. And the reason for that is because conversations about real risk and issues and being able to push back, and real discussions about budget, you've got to have the right relationship there. I think it's important that they don't see the L&D project manager as the project manager, but a partner. And I think that has a lot to do with realistically how we show up. Asking from a high level to see everything about the overall project, right? Usually our training piece falls in a larger scale IT system rollout. We want to know all about that. I think from the L&D perspective, we can't be content to just show up and understand our piece of things. Ask the other questions. You'll be surprised to see that if you ask to be invited to strategy sessions, you'll be invited. And I think from our side, being as transparent as possible with the business owners and sponsors is important also. Sometimes there are things that we can characterize as, training or L&D items or tools or techniques. And we're not necessarily open about that, or we go off and we have those discussions in a sidebar, a side room. I think being as transparent as possible, but I really think it comes back to those strong relationships, particularly with the champions and sponsors.
I would agree with that. If I can add just one thing to that, I think, positioning L&D as an aid to user adoption and as an aid to users loving the system compared to, resisting the system. If you talk in those terms, that'll help you get a seat at that table as well. They'll see you as an ally rather than just a must-have, because they know they have to train. But if you say that it's going to help the users love your system and you will be the hero as IT in your rollout, that'll go a long way.
Agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to add too, I think it's really helpful to be able to demonstrate and show L&D's value from any prior IT initiatives that they've supported. So is there anything that you can share around participation and adoption rates, effectiveness of training, any ROI that can be shared just to show what that value has looked like previously and what value you can bring to the table now? I think that's also very critical.
Good point.
And as an example, also when I was talking about partnership, on the last large system rollout project that I was working on, I set up a regular touch base with the high-level sponsor. And when we got into those sessions, the majority of the discussion really wasn't about some of the on-the-ground project issues that we were looking at. It was more around his high-level concerns and where things were going next. Things that seemed, right, maybe from the standpoint of some to have nothing to do with the L&D project management role that I was playing. But I was very interested in what he was doing, understanding that, and it had a lot of value, right, and trickle down into what we were doing day to day with the actual project team. And I think that that particular sponsor, he ended up seeing a lot of value there. He could bounce things off of us. We could get ahead of things. Essentially, we became partners. And again, those tougher conversations around risk or budget, if they did come up, they were a lot easier to have.
And I think too, I'm gonna caveat this statement with an asterisk that training is not the solution to everything, and we all know that. But it's been statistically proven in studies that even a small amount of training for something like an IT development team leads to exponentially more adoption and acceptance of that IT training, right? At a bare minimum, it creates awareness about the change and gives some users some information about the change that's happening, so they're not walking into something blind. So let's remember that L&D does have a place at the table, and even in a minor way, it can impact adoption and that change management piece. Also, too, I've found that a lot of L&D organizations don't ask. Right? Just ask to be included at the table. Ask to be invited to those early meetings. Ask to be
Absolutely
involved in those design sessions and those plan sessions, and you can be a quiet observer and take notes. Most organizations don't want to exclude you. They just don't realize you're there. So just kind of make yourself say, raise your hand and say, I'm here, can I join? And most, IT development groups will kind of welcome you and kind of allow you in on that. So this is great.
Yeah, from a development perspective, I think going to the long lines of what Paul said a while back of, finding that correct solution. When you're in the discussions early as a developer, or development manager, whatever the role may be, you can kind of help drive the discussion in the right direction. So they're not looking at the wrong solution early on. Because you kind of know what it's going to entail. You hear what they're looking for. You hear what the content might be. You can start brainstorming, as you said, Mitch, early on those solutions. And just even having those ideas in the back of your head, so when this does finally come to you, you're ready for it.
And I think to that point, and I know that it may sound like a cliche, but really try to avoid silo discussions as much as
Sure.
as much as possible. As often as possible, right? Everyone's in the room together from, right, whichever lane, whichever track. It has huge benefit. You know, everybody experiences that, you know, things may come up that you didn't plan for, even in terms of opportunistic discussions, but just having everybody in the room together. I find it akin to working sessions where you've got everybody in the room together. At the end of the session, you just find that you've gotten a lot more done. You make a lot more progress.
Thanks, Paul. So I wanted to carve out about 5 minutes for some discussion, right? Some questions and Q&A. I know that Jess, you've been monitoring the chat feature, right? And if you have any questions right now, feel free to pop those in there and we'll try to get to them. Do we have any questions lined up, Jess?
We do. This might be a good one for Barb. Most of what you've talked about today talked about business users using new IT systems.
Yeah.
What about the flip of that when you have to train IT users?
Good question.
That's good. That's good. Right. I mean, technology is always changing. So your IT teams absolutely are going to be needing training on a regular basis. So definitely keep that in mind. I think a lot of the same principles apply when we're talking about training the IT team on, let's say, a new technology or a new, you know, programming language or what have you that's coming down the pike. Teach them, talk about why the change needs to happen, and then get into the details and give them practical examples and so forth. Do not ignore your IT teams.
Barb, does that mean that, can I ask,
Yeah.
does that mean that you do a different type of audience analysis?
Well, there are, yeah, I mean, there are the learner personas within the IT team are going to be unique to that particular learning challenge. Right? You know, think about the technologists. They absolutely are going to want that practical experience. You know, there's a reason why Hello World exercises have been used since the beginning of time, or the beginning of technical time anyway. It's because the technical user is going to want to see that Hello World, that progress where they've actually accomplished something. And that's part of their persona, that you have to give them those experiences.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions lined up, Jess?
Yeah. So Christine, it's probably a good one for you. Are you what are you seeing as you're talking to learning leaders? Any trends, issues, or any kind of needs that you've seen that kind of enable us to have this conversation today?
Yeah, quite a few trends. With the one, I think it was highlighted earlier, kind of centers around this idea of needing to move to micro learning. I mean, historically, you would see some of these IT trainings last for an extended period of time. And right now we need to focus on taking that and breaking it down to bite-sized chunks. So a lot of our initial conversations are around, you know, how do we do that? We need to get it done. Our team is telling me we need to get it done. How do we do that? So we're having to address a lot of that lately. In terms of other IT concerns or trends too, I would say things are on demand. Having on-demand training versus something that's pre-planned out has been a big hit. And I'm not sure if anyone on our Caveo team wants to shed light on this as well as you dig into these conversations deeper. But as IT teams learn that they need a new skill set, given how much has changed, they need to be able to have training on demand given to them to account for whatever that new skill is that they need to be upskilled on. So I think that's another thing that we've been seeing a lot of is individual L&D teams need to be able to create these trainings on demand. How do they do it and how do they do it quickly? So that's something that I would definitely highlight as well. Any other thoughts on anyone else on the team who's seen this maybe in a little bit more depth?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And actually I saw your comment, Renisha, about the knowledge hour. And I'm thinking, you know, could we have a knowledge hour, or maybe it's a knowledge 20 minutes internally within the IT team to share the skill sets that one person has, and that it happens to be a gap in another. Absolutely, they could be partnering together to share that knowledge within the team. and elevate the whole team together.
I think we have a question in the chat from Yolanda. What are some post-training performance support systems or approaches that the panel has tried?
Performance support systems. Yeah, I mean, there's the, learning in the flow of work concept. As much as we can bring that performance support system as close to the system as possible, the better off we are. Is there an opportunity to build here actually is another opportunity to have a partnership with your tech docs team, and
Right.
the technical documentation may be part of that performance support solution for you. How close can you tie it together with the system?
And there are a lot of PST systems out there that you can buy that can implement with your IT system. But if you're at a smaller organization, even things like utilizing things like Vimeo and YouTube to create a short 30-second training video and the catalog those.
Yeah.
Right. If you put 10 of those together of the 10 most common issues that you're going to face with this new implementation or this upgrade or this enhancement, kind of put those videos out there for people to watch when they need it. That gets them that on-demand training right when they need it. And that way you're not tying them up in a 2-hour e-learn or a 2-hour instructor-led training, but they're on the job and they're like, shoot, how did I do that? And they can actually access YouTube channel or a Vimeo channel or anything to kind of just watch a 30-second video and kind of really get that quickly when they need it.
Yeah, and partner with your support desk. The support desk is, they're going to be getting the brunt of the calls. So be sure you're checking that channel to find out what it is, what performance support do they need.
And I think there's one in the Q&A. We're going to do this answer live.
Yeah, this could probably be its own webinar, but any tips that we could do in 1 minute for how to identify IT training needs?
How to identify, I'm sorry, say again.
How to identify any IT training needs?
Yeah, I think one of those big things is that seat at the table, right? We spent a lot of time talking about that. Kind of, being ahead of the game, right? There's always, when you have IT systems, there's always going to be enhancements. There's always going to be bug fixes. The earlier you can get in on those conversations, the quicker you're going to find out, maybe I need to do some training on this, maybe I don't. Another good thing you want to do is stay in close contact with the learner group, right? The end users, the ones that are going to be using it, so that if you know something and you see it's coming down the pipe's going to come out, go, hey, do you guys feel like you're going to need some training on this? So you're going to need something robust. How often are you going to use this upgrade? How often are you going to use the system? So being in contact with both the developers and then the end users kind of helps you determine, what those needs are.
And serve food. I found,
food always
food
works.
To the table, brings people to your table.
Food is always a good bribe.
For in person, yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
I still haven't found that virtual equivalent of the donuts on the coffee table.
And I would add again
virtual
to
gift cards.
That's right.
I would add again to what Mitch said. Also, again, be in touch with the champions and the sponsors. I'll keep reiterating that.
Yes.
Because again, they see things from a different view and they'll know what's coming down the pipe.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We could probably go on for another hour on these topics. We really want to thank you for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to anyone on the panel. We're on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to us through our Caveo emails, and we'd be more than willing to continue the conversation with you. But thanks for joining us today, and have a good day. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.